Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the winter spring class, and this is our 7th office hour. We have some amazing questions coming us today, a lot from Sergey and a few from a few others. But one of the things that Sergey asked a while ago was, how do I use Google Earth Pro in my design process, which is a great question. I had some issues with my software last time, and so that's largely been sorted out. So I'll give you folks a sense of how I use Google Earth Pro. I'll also give you a sense of the different types of overlays and GIS overlays I contract and things like that to show you how that all works. So I'm just going to turn off a few elements here before I do the big reveal. And then we'll come back to this. Okay. So I just got to check and make sure I've turned off everybody else. Yeah. Okay. Privacy looks good. So if you haven't checked out or looked into Google Earth Pro yet, it is free. Make sure when you go to the application for the download that you download the desktop version. And basically, Google Earth Pro is a GIS access application that can give you world information that is accurate depending on its resolution. So at this resolution, very accurate. When we get down to homesteads level or size, less and less accurate. And this is because the majority of the information that came from that Google Earth Pro is using came from the Shuttle Radar Topographic Mission, the SRTM 2000 mission that happened in 2000 through NASA. And basically, they ran the world with LiDAR. And when they were shooting the laser down from the satellite, it was a 30-meter pixel, which means if the information, specifically the z-axis, the altitude, is less than 30 meters, which most of our sites are, then that data needed to be interpolated, which is that wonderful scientific word for guess. So when we're using Google Earth Pro for X and Y, it's usually like 2 to 5 meters in terms of error, and Z can be up to 15 to 30. So that's really important to understand that anything we make in a mapping software, pretty much without exception, is going to have to be ground truth when we get down to the site, the homestead, the farm, etc. So I think that's the only big caveat I wanted to give. So on the left-hand side here, I'm just going to close a few things so you can kind of see how I've set up my Google Earth Pro. So I've got my current clients that are active, which I'll turn off. I have my completed clients. I have examples, metadata. So as I find metadata for climate, topography, water, access, soil, and forestry, I can put it in there and I can turn it on or off for any specific area. So for example, I use quite a bit of the Köppen-Geiger classification, and I've turned on way too much in this folder, and it's going to have a moment. Yeah, so we're going to have to turn off a few things. So I think we'll turn off this one, and this one, and this one. There we go. Actually, we'll turn that one back on, and then we'll turn off this legend. So the Köppen-Geiger classification is a way of classifying the entire planet into different types of climate classifications. I've used it for the last decade and has been very helpful to understanding the different climate classifications. And then there are some of these that show us what might become in the future. I don't know if it's this one or the next one. Yeah, so we can put in a range of dates starting from which to which, and it'll show us those different climate classifications as they change throughout the year. So when I do advanced climate modeling, this is one of the tools I use to get a sense of, well, what is this site going to look like in 50, 25, 75, 125 years into the future? So this is some of that metadata. And then we have potential clients that are coming up. I have different templates that I've taken from different areas and made myself. So some of these templates are mine, and then student examples. And so when we get into a client example, what usually happens is I've got usually a place marker. And so that place marker gives me a sense of where in the world it is. It's a quick click. It allows me to get down to exactly where we are, which is great. I have a property boundary, which I can turn off and on. I have site visits, which I'll put in there. I have GIS outputs from different vendors and contractors I work with. And then I have the scale of permits for all things agriculture, all things agricultural as created by P.A. Yeomans and refined by Darren Doherty and the Agrarians. And I generally use the naming conventions of the Agrarians just because it's a very active community. If you're going to work with large scale design, I highly recommend the next course you take to be the Agrarians Rex course. And so basically what the Rex is, or what the Agrarians platform is it's an online platform. It's through the workplace platform created by Facebook or Meta, and has every single element of every single aspect of the keyline scale of permanence for all things agricultural, which they now call the Agrarians platform, and probably the most active designers in a community space on the planet. So when you buy in for a year, you get access to at least one, if not two Rexes, plus a bunch of training, including Google Earth Pro training, QGIS training. They've got an Earth and Dam training that'll be coming out, I think, this summer. Lots of great things. And if people are interested in that, I'll put a link down for people to check it out. So generally, when we get into this keyline scale of permits for all things agricultural, one of the first things I'll do is I'll take a look at weather stations, if it's in Canada or the US, and I'll put in those weather stations. So basically, I'm finding those weather stations through Environment Canada, and I basically link them so that way I can get to them and get to their information quite quick and easy, just so I have a sense of, if there is no weather station nearby, what is the information I'm taking from. Other overlays that will sometimes go on the climate section. I used to get what's called a watts per meter squared output, which gives me a sense of how much solar energy is to each meter, which if you're working with different types of trees and plants and even different types of structures, you want to know where those different elements are. For geography, so we'll come back down to our site here. There's a number of GIS overlays that I'll get produced, and a couple of quick keys for folks on the Google Earth Pro. U puts it directly up and north, or pardon me, U has it overhead and N has it north. So if I ever, turn it here by grabbing the N, and I can hit north, and it'll give me straight up and down. And if I ever come in or change my viewpoint, I hit U, it'll give me an entirely overhead viewpoint. So if I ever want to true that. So a couple of conversations here is, it's nice to get a hillshade. Hillshades are great because they give you the opportunity to generally get a sense of what the area looks like. And it's great for clients. So one of the things I do with clients is I'll give them this folder when I'm done. Or we will host it in a place and then do what's called a network folder, which means that if I host it in, let's say, Google Drive, and we both have it networked to that Google Drive address, if I update it, then they get updated as well. Generally, at the end of the conversation, when I do my deliverables, I just send it to them because I don't necessarily want them mucking up what I do, and it's always nice to have some base data that we can come to. From the hillshade, we'll tend to get contours. So I'll take a 5 and a 1 meter on this one, only because as we get into the hill that's up here, and this is one of the nice things about being in Google Earth, is that you can really get a sense of a site. If you're doing remote work, you can get a sense of how big and the different types of aspects. This is a north-south valley. It has solar occlusion from its east rock face here that includes quite a bit of light, I think upwards of 5 to 6 hours in the spring, summer. So it can be a fair amount that they lose. The other I really like is an aspect map. So aspect gives me a sense of what is facing north, east, south, west. So I can get a sense of what might go where. And then we have 2 maps, one in slope degrees and one in slope percentage. Because depending on what we do, there are some activities we do not want to go into on these different slope classifications. Generally, once we get beyond 15 degrees, we're not going to be doing any tractor work. And as you move upwards, we're going to be moving into different types of cultivars and different types of patterns and things of that nature. So that's a geography layer. Water layer. So water layer, we've got a couple. We've got what's called accumulation. So accumulation is great because it gives us a sense of how much water is accumulated in each category. So if we go down and we go up again, We know that there is sort of just north here, we're getting into the 40 to 90, 90 to 350 1,000 meters, which means that if we take this site's annual rainfall, which I think is in the 650 mil, we can do quick calculations to understand where all these different volumes come into play, so we can have a sense of where that comes into. And Sergey, to your other question about kind of bridging the two questions, as we get into full site slope analysis, things of that nature, QGIS and Google Earth Pro make it a lot quicker and a lot easier when you're doing those types of data analyses. So you were saying it could take a very long time, and I think the question was, could be quite expensive and only available to the only very rich. Things like this are relatively easy and quick to create. There's also what's called a flow accumulation, which in this area is not all that useful. I'm just going to wait for it to turn off because it's a larger file. There we go. And then total water accumulation shows the different flow patterns on the site. So all of that gives me a sense of where the water is. And then as I'm taking a look at the client's needs and wants, I can start to have a conversation with them about that. So Francis is saying, sorry, I'm late. Did Javin show where he got those data sets from? I've been struggling to get contours. No, I didn't. So yeah, contours are a whole different conversation. And Francis, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the Q&A doc, I'll get to where you get your data sets from, and we can have that conversation. Also existing, we want to know where the well is or any other water pipes existing, etc. So that all goes into the water section. So access, we'll put in the main road and any side roads or tracks. I'm working with a client in the Pacific Northwest, and they just went out with their phone and mapped all the different trails and tracks, because I'm doing most of the design work right now remotely, and then I'm going to have a site visit come the summer. So it's great to get all that data in so we know exactly where that road system is. Utilities, so just getting a sense of where that main electrical line is. And then ecosystems, we start to get into existing forestry and things of that nature. So these are a couple of the existing plots. This is an interesting design in that we were talking and I was working with them as I was designing at the same time. So they wanted to get in to put in a field. So we decided the site and all the rest of that. So this is House Garden Field 1 annuals, indicator of specimens for fields 2 to X. So that just means 2 to however many fields they have in the back. Food forest edge on eastern site, focus on perennial crops, keep covered with plants or tarps, initially dug summer of 2022. Then we've got experimental field 2. So this is the orchard. It's experimental because I don't believe with all the solar recon I've done, they have enough solar aspect to really get really great tasting apples. They could probably do cider, which is what they want to do. But again, this is a great thing about Google Earth. Let's go down to the site here. Oh, it's having a moment. There we go. Let's turn ourselves around. Where are you? Let's get right down low. And then let's look up into the sky. So in this situation, you can really get a sense of where that solar aspect gets cut off halfway through the solstice and equinox, very early in the winter. And then during the summer, they're getting close to 10 to 12 hours, but those shoulder seasons are really important. And then again, we can click U and north, and we can be right back to where we need. They also have they inherited this sea buckthorn thicket, which is back here, which is lovely, but it hosts bears during the summer and is almost impenetrable now. So conversations about what to do here. The existing sea buckthorn cultivar isn't a choice. Good idea to replace. And one of the things that we came to in the design here is there's going to be and one of the Sergey, the other thing that happened is I lost my design work. So I've been recreating this over the last couple of weeks. That program issue made me lose about 2 years of design work. So I've slowly been recreating this from memory, which is great because it's the good stuff sticks. So you always go back. But one of the innovative things that we designed in this is that we're going to have, I'm just going to put it into fencing. So that way, laneway, is we're going to have a path from the goat barn here. We're going to have a laneway. So a goat laneway that actually, I think we were thinking it was going to run the full length of this. And so basically it's just it's a laneway that allows the goats to go back and forth. And then as they decide to or want to get into building this next field structure, they can then let the goats out, do some temporary fencing, and have the goats actually prime this area. The other thing that was important was to have some thinning of the forest right behind them. So similarly, they can also let the goats out uphill. So the nice thing about a laneway is you can have a pre-existing structure, which is relatively cheap and easy to use, and then just a number of simple, quick, just open fence areas that you can pop the goats into an area and let them graze for a day or two and denude that area, and then or devegetate the area for forest. So I'm going to remove that. And then I'm using a different color for some of the proposed forests. So we've got our proposed fruit and nut orchard. Fields 3 to X are not to be cultivated are to be cultivated on a labor supply basis. So both of these folks, these clients, are academics. They've got full-time work. And one of the things that I see time and time again is people designing elements within their landscapes that they can't maintain. That creates a sense of, oh, I can't do this, and then they give up. And so one of the things we did with these clients is we started them with values-based decision-making, which is the ability to choose and to clarify the values of your project without becoming in the weeds, without getting into the weeds with your decisions, and then allowing those values to evaluate the decision. So one of their values is we close loops before we open them, and our time is abundant. So when those values came out in their values-based decision-making, their land design context, it became very clear that they needed to be conscientious that until they find a farm manager or until they bring on people to help with projects, they can't be taking on larger and larger in fields. So this is one of the reasons why this original field 1 on this right-hand side is going to be kind of a mini food forest of everything they may want to plant towards the back. So that way they've also got an eye on all species that might be behind them. So this is a way of, let's say you have a sea buckthorn orchard back here. Let's put the sea buckthorn back up. It means you'll probably have a couple of those specimens in row here. So that way you can have an eye on what all that looks like. Another element was we were looking at a privacy hedge because we were thinking of also doing, where was it here? A potential campground. So they're directly on what's called the Trans-Canada Trail, which is a trail that runs all across Canada. A lot of bicyclists that come through. And so one of the ideas was to eventually have a stop and stay with maybe a breakfast option. But of course, you don't want to see it from the house. And putting it further back in the yard potentially could have problems in terms of access. So we came down to this area as being a good idea. And then we have all the buildings. So these are the current buildings on site. I'm going to turn off the ecosystems layer. These are all the buildings on site. So we've got the primary residence, the high tunnel, the goat barn and yard, the woodshed, and the chicken tractor. And I was just recreating where we decided to place their barn dominium. This is a funny thing that came up in Canada a couple of years ago, where when you got a raw piece of land, you would create the Quonset or the barn with a little apartment on top. So that way you could build out the rest of the site. So this would be a place to where a farm manager could live. And then within soils, different types of soil types and potentially implementations, economy. These folks didn't contract me to do any sort of enterprise development or anything of that nature. And then any sort of energy. So that's the other thing about the watts per meter squared. That would give us a sense of potential areas to put on a ground-mounted solar relay. And so generally what I do is I use Google Earth to place all of my elements and generally get a sense of it. And then afterwards, if there is a detail that needs further design, for example, I might do a sketch of this area, working in row culture and I might even do this in in Zoom because it's easier. So working in row culture, having different sections for rotations, so annuals, maybe 3 or 4 sections, and then having a couple of sections that are going to be more towards our taller species, our tree species, etc. A couple of bramble trellises and things like that. And I think largely, and we talked about this as during one of our design meetings, largely they'll probably have more than enough for their own larder from this, plus the sale that they were trying to do. So I introduced them to a couple of products. One was garlic, black garlic and garlic chutney, both of which are value added, both of which are easy to produce, both of which you can do small batch and get a high return for. And I think generally from the quick numbers I did, again, I wasn't contracted to do this, but you'll find as a designer, it's hard not to help people out. It looked like they could make their farm income from that alone if they wanted to. So once I have finished all that, I basically either give them this in totality, or if they've contracted a detailed concept plan, I'm happy to do that as well. These folks didn't, so they'll just be getting this folder plus I think it's probably close to 90 pages now, feasibility study that goes into each of these areas in detail. So that's how I use Google Earth Pro. Questions about that before I go to Francis's question about data sets and where to find them?
Wow. Do you have a tutorial?
No, no, this is Javin's design process. This isn't permaculture. This is how I work with permaculture and other design processes.
So if I was trying to build my foundation base, where would I begin?
Your foundation base in Google Earth Pro, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a number of YouTube tutorials about how to use Google Earth Pro, just to start off with it. And the other thing is I've been talking with OSU about developing a Google Earth Pro course just for design. But basically, you know, the primary thing is learn how to use paths and pathways and polygons, like understand the process of how to put things onto an application. And then from there, it's whatever the architecture is. You know, if you want to use something like the keyline scale of permanence for all things agricultural, you can just copy this file structure, and under the file structure, it's basically existing and proposed. And then you're basically hunting information. You're finding information either by going on site and taking GPS coordinates. Again, having the highest resolution GPS you can get. The Bad Elf Surveyor is the highest resolution Bluetooth enabled surveyor that I have found thus far. That's sort of consumer level. You can move to what's called an MLID RTK, but now you're in the $4,000 and $5,000 range. So if you're just going and taking points, you want to know where the well is, you want to know where the edges of buildings are, you can do that. And this is the great thing about Google Earth Pro. Those types of files that come out of a GPS or GIS application on your phone do import. So when I'm on Android, I use Gaia GPS, and then I just started using another one that's been super useful. It's just a brand new one I found because these clients of mine, Gaia GPS no longer exports the file I needed. So it was called GPS Waypoints. And then if you're using iOS, GPS Kit, which is actually my favorite. But seeing as I moved to Android on my phone, I've got that on my iPad. And that's very easy to take photos and to take images with photos and to bring them in as site visits. And then from there, it's basically just playing. I was introduced very similar to you. I saw somebody using this. It was like, wow, I want to do that. Then I started to do it. Then colleagues of mine in Verge and other places found, I shared with them what I was doing. And so they started to copy. And so basically you'll find that the majority of the designers that work at scale now are using a Google Earth Pro, QGIS, or ArcGIS. Or if you're doing large scale design, they're using a custom tool called Overyield, which is fresh out as of the last 3 years, has really increased its capabilities in the last year and a half. And so if you're laying out large vineyards, if you're laying out large horticulture, you can design completely in that application. And then you can send that data to a GPS-enabled tractor or people on the ground to design in. So a couple of ways to go about it there. I'm just going to check the chat here. I see that we've got a question that popped in. Is there a way to label paths with their length? I see you're getting description info when you click, but I would love to see. Yeah, so I can give you a quick tutorial on that. So let's say we take our existing path access. Let's say our main dirt road. There we go. So I'm going to click on it and either right click get info or just Command I. And so a couple things here, little trick. If you want to see the name of it, when you click on it, you have to put it into this description box. So now what'll happen is if I click on this, it'll pop up. And then to your point about length, if we go to measurements, we can get a sense of what the measurements are here. We can click to kilometers. So we know this is 0.4 kilometers. I'll just get everyone to mute themselves if you can just check that and make sure. And I'm going to go 0.4 km. And I'll probably also put that into the description. And so I'll do this pretty routinely when I'm developing different areas. I'll put in the size and the scope and the scale of different areas. So that way, when I click on them, I can get the length. And this is one of the reasons why I use Google Earth. When we were doing a seed cover crop for this field 1 in my original folder, which no longer exists, when we clicked on field 1, it had the full acreage, because the seed mix we were using was a pounds per acre. So this one had an acreage to it that we could use. So we could even find that out. Now we could go Command I, go to measurements, go to acres here. So yeah, 0.09 acres. And then of course, I'm going to copy that and put that into the description as well. And so now if I was working on this and needed to quickly jump into it, I would have that reference information. That's a great question, Canna. Thanks. Any other questions about Google Earth Pro?
How do you integrate stuff that you do with the drone work, with like Morpolia Trace? Do you also bring it here, or kind of live separately?
So good question. So there's a lot in that question. So with drone work, basically, and this gets to Francis's question about data. So in this site, so let's take the data question first. In this site, the accessible public information was, again, it was the 30-meter pixel. So it didn't have enough information to be useful. So instead, I told my clients that I could walk them through the process of how to potentially find information, or I could do it for them, of course, at a fee. And they decided they wanted me to walk them through it. So instead, I gave them my list, which if you go into, I think it's Basemap, there's a tutorial there of how to find contour information, which I'm basically going to repeat myself. One of the first things was to reach out to local foresters, mills, community forest, community woodlot, and see if the area had been surveyed at some point. It had, and they got the information for their site for free because they had this intelligence that I had given them to reach out. Mining and natural resource, primary resource, sometimes can find that information as well. And then you can look to larger scale surveyors or drone surveyors and ask them if they have the data for this area. So usually you'll have to give them the parcel indicator number or the parcel ID or the coordinates of the 4 points to see if they have it. The other way to do it is to reach out to the local county, reach out to them, ask them if they have information on this. Usually tell them you're working on a regenerative ecological restoration project. And that tends to grease the wheels pretty good. If you don't have that information, then you either need to survey the site or you need to go with the information you have. So in this site, if I had to survey, what I would have done is I probably would have run Oh, it's getting close. I probably would have run a drone. Probably would have run the DJI Mavic 2 I had, and just over this area, because the problem with drones and photogrammetry mapping is that it only works on open canopy. And the nice thing about if I had done this, which I didn't have to do, is that it would have given me the detailed information I needed just for the site. But because this other area is so much difference in elevation, then that 30-meter pixel would have been enough. From that point, Sergey, that drone data would have then gone to GIS specialists, so Paper Street Permaculture, Brent Smith, and you can always take a look for others on Upwork or Fiverr or things of that nature. And basically, they then run the data through QGIS or ArcGIS, and then they produce those GIS outputs that you were seeing there. And then I bring them back into Google Earth Pro with a KMZ file. Now you can do all of this in QGIS or ArcGIS. The problem with QGIS is that it's a very involved piece of software, and unless you're using it all the time, it's really easy to forget the way and how to go about using it. We kind of joke that the Q stands for quirky because it's free, whereas Arc is a little bit more straightforward. But ultimately, these are pieces of software that if you're not using all the time, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to be accessing them as much as we talk about. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And this is one of the reasons why I've kept with Google Earth Pro. Funny enough, last week was the 8th year anniversary of when I went to take a QGIS training from Brent from Paper Street Permaculture. And I spent, I think, close to $1,200 to realize that Brent was my QGIS specialist, and I would happily pay him whatever he wanted to do it. Because I only do 2 or 3 designs a year, I don't need that information stored in my mind, and I don't need the fear or the frustration of having to go and access it. I do know how to use it, and if a push comes to shove, I could. It would just take me a lot longer, and it would just drop the potential profit that comes off of the design job, and it would reduce my motivation to use it. It's a good question. Any other questions about Google Earth before we move on?
I have one.
Uh-huh.
How you import data about climate?
So there's a couple pieces about climate data. So one of the things I'll do is if and when I find a compass windrows, which we've shown before in the tutorials, I will bring that in directly in as an image and overlay it onto the map. As I was saying before, I lost all of my work, so this doesn't exist, and this is my only current public project that has given me permission to share with people. So fortunately, I can't go into the annals and pull out the previous ones, but I like doing that. I like taking that that element. The other thing I'll do, and I used to do this before I started just bringing in the weather stations like I showed at the beginning. So if I click on these weather stations, it'll reach out to the internet and actively bring up the information. I used to take screenshots of all of these graphs and actively put them directly into the map, which is fine and easy to do, but I found overall it just didn't need to happen. So generally, I always have the data here, and I always have the raw data to come and take a look at. So if I am doing calculations, everything's right here. So generally, that's the information I bring in. I'm bringing in wind. I'm bringing in the norms. If I'm working with Brad Lancaster's one sheet, this was in the water section. I will usually create a link to that and put that into the Google Earth profile, because then clients can get to it as well. I'll usually use the one sheet if I don't have this pre-existing data as neat and tidy as this is. One of the nice things about in Canada, if you do a design job, is that this data is very neat and tidy. Otherwise, what I would do is if you're in a place where you're taking information off WeatherSpark or Metro Blue, I'd probably take those major charts that we had you snip and put into your climate survey, and I would load them directly into the climate section and have them pop up. And usually when I do it, I put them kind of off to the side here, so that way I can see them and take a look at them and work with them without overlapping or interacting with the site itself. Good question. Thanks, Daliborka. Any other questions about Google Earth Pro? Okay. So it's a fun tool. It's an easy tool to use, easy to understand, and great to use with clients because it's rather user-friendly. Clients can usually figure it out pretty easily. Let's jump on back to the big question list. I'm going to share my screen again. So from Sergey, do you do a full analysis, sector, soil, water flow, et cetera, for each and every client project? I'm a project manager in a regenerative landscape design and restoration company. I make estimates for a lot of projects we do. Company is not permaculture per se, though the principles are very cognizant with the concepts in general. Having gone through 2/3 of a PDC, spent hours upon design analysis and putting them into a user-friendly form, the template in our case, I can see how quickly the design costs could escalate to the point of not being affordable. Yeah, so generally, when I'm working with a client, I try to make the deliverables on their end as easy as I can for me. One of the reasons why we created the template for the course is that the majority of the jobs that you'll need to create a full template that they can print out and give to somebody is very few. But it's kind of like learning how to drive standard. Once you know how to drive standard, you can drive any car. And once you know how to have a deliverable of that quality, normally for things like non-for-profits that are applying for grants because they want to see the design work, then you're good to go. So usually within sector, soil, water flow, et cetera, there's a lot of those data sets, especially in the States, which is all existing that can just be plopped directly into Google Earth Pro. So usually in a day or a half day, I can get the majority of the data I need for a site. Then putting that into a report takes a little bit more time. So it's always about budget with clients. So what are they wanting to do and what's the level of resolution? I've worked on sites where clients say, I just want you to come and have me walk the site and generally tell me what you think. And that's great. You know, those are days where it's just curiosity based and it's an hourly and you're saying, well, I don't know much about your site because I haven't looked at this, or this. However, I would be thinking about this. I would be thinking about the water flow here. I would be thinking about the climate here. But generally what I'm seeing, I'm thinking about a site I went to back in August. They had a water issue and I hadn't done a full water analysis. We just walked the upper pond, which had been split in two between them and the neighbors. So we walked over on the neighbor's land and came back. We saw where the inflow was, where the outflow was. I made the caveat that it looks like it's semi-spring fed. And he said, yeah, I think that's true. And so we just roughed out a plan to slowly, incrementally see if they could bring more water to that area and bring water down the site. So it all depends on a client's budget and the level of detail they're looking for. Some clients want a very detailed design conversation and it takes time and effort. And some just want your general thoughts. And so I basically have a scale for full and complete design to people who just want a day walkabout. A buddy of mine, Zach Weiss, I think he put his rate up, I think he's 1,500 a day now, but he comes on site, he does full analysis day 1, day 2, he starts designing day 3, he can be on a machine day 4, day 5. Now, normally he comes for a site visit and then he comes back, but he also has a very specific set of tools. He's a Sepp Holzer student. So he's working not necessarily in a full permaculture conversation or perspective. He's just working on where does the pond go? Where would the hugelkultures or the terraces go? And what you do and what you put in there is completely up to you. He's not taking that big scope and scale. And this is a good point as well. You may not want to take on that level of conversation with your clients. You may not want to do that big approach. It's always been very interesting to me. And so I've always done these full complete feasibility reports, which then culminate in a design to where people say, wow, you've given me a manual for my site, which the people generally who are coming to me are attracted to me because I do that, because I have this deep dive on their site. Some people who just want a pond, it's great, but I always say it's with the caveat that I don't know your complete site, and so I'm making my best guess. I'm not actually confirming my recommendation whatsoever. And I say that in writing, and they sign the contract saying Javin's going to be guessing about this because they don't want to pay for that full design analysis, which is fine. You can usually get it 60 to 80% right. Problem is 20 to 40% wrong in a pond is a problem. So I usually don't take on those jobs unless it's a very basic site and it's very simple to put together. But it's a really good question. Okay, on to Sir Guy's monster question that may take the rest of the conversation, which is good because Colin's question about organization and documentation for non-computer users, I realized that I left all of my sheets and forms back in Canada. So Colin, I will need to recreate those and give it a fair bit of thought to think about what all the columns were and everything else. So I will work on that for you, sir. So yeah, for our last question, which will arguably run long, permaculture and AI. Last week, New York Times had an article on real life AI uses by people. Number one was John Pritzlaff, who was building a permaculture garden in his backyard in Phoenix. I do these ultra high density planting arrangements, he said. I've been employing ChatGPT to give me inspiration on species that wouldn't have occurred to me otherwise and choosing the site for each tree. Best part of the yard with regard to the sun and different time of year. Taking into account his geographical location, it suggested, for example, that he might use a moringa tree to provide shade for a star apple. There's an active conversation in the permaculture community about threats, benefits of AI application to design. What is being discussed, debated? Do you have a formal opinion of your own? You chose the right time to ask this question. So I came back from my major flood renovation. I had been hearing and seeing a lot of application uses for ChatGPT use cases. I came back very sick. And finally, in my second week of sickness, while I was still having problems breathing and going to sleep and all the rest of it, I was like, I can't ignore this anymore. And so I took a massive deep dive into AI. I took a look at most of the large learning LLMs, large language models. So ChatGPT 4 being the main one. I took a little bit at Bing and a couple of the offshoots of those, Google Bard being one of them, which was immediately discarded because it's just not up to par yet. And for everybody who's new to this conversation, basically what OpenAI, the company that created ChatGPT 4, which is its current iteration, did is over the past couple of years, they trained a language model, which basically means that they fed it information and then created a predictive conversation where when you ask this application ChatGPT a question, it is predicting what the answer will be based on the data it's been trained upon. Which means you can ask questions like, as a friend of mine sent me, if I was going to design a PDC, who are the top people in the world you would choose for each section and what would they teach? And, outputted this whole conversation. So one of the things that I've come to realize within ChatGPT, specifically listening to and reading about the limitations right now from Sam Altman, who's the CEO, and a couple of the detractors, is that it's not reliable and it's not truthful. And the only mechanism to validate the output from ChatGPT right now is ChatGPT, which is a problem. When you ask a liar to tell them which one of the lies they told you is a lie, you have an issue. So right now, the reliability and the truth aspect of ChatGPT is not at a place where I would be making design recommendations based upon an output from ChatGPT. What I have been using it for and have been exploring is its ability to ideate, to brainstorm, to think, to brainstorm, to create options from a prompt. And those options from the prompt have produced elements and aspects of giving it and feeding it variables of a design and a design site and a design location and asking it what homestead configuration it might be, or what plant speciations would be good for a family that's working on a perennial conversation. Of the responses I've gotten, I've thrown out 6 out of 10, which is pretty high. It's pretty high to be playing with it right now. However, the exponential growth that we're seeing in AI means that tomorrow I could only be throwing out 20% or 2 of them, and maybe the next day it could be none. So me and a group of gents who used to meet every year as a mastermind saw this coming about 8-9 years ago, when a father-son duo, Scottish, I don't remember their names. They had this amazing book, and it wasn't titled The Future of Work. I looked for it right before now. But basically they had a book and they had a podcast and they had a couple of speaking engagements. And they proposed that 80 to 90% of white collar work would be gone within 2 decades. And the 5 of us were sitting around a table. We may or may not have been drinking scotch. And it was very interesting to experience the emotional reaction that some of us had to what's the possibility and the probability of this? Is it possible? 100%. Is it probable, knowing who we are as people and how we interact with technology? Also close to 100%. So we all looked at this and we all said, well, what is rare within our fields? And a colleague of mine came up with this saying, or gregariously stole it, as he did a lot of things. What's real is rare. So there's this concept and this conversation of what is real is rare, and this idea of a human connection will always have a place for people. And this is where my formal opinion begins. I think at some point we're going to get to AI certified and human certified. I think at some point, or it'll be asked for. If not officially, it will be unofficial, that people will want to know that their materials, their consumables, their cultural, their creativity is either human derived or AI derived. And we're seeing that a lot with the pushback from Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, which are 2 graphic AI programs. I don't know if anybody caught this, but somebody made a Weeknd and Drake song, which is totally AI, and already has 250,000 views on Spotify, or listens on Spotify. So like, again, this exponential curve is coming up. So the ideation portion, I think, is great. The report writing, I think, is fantastic. I think the ability to give it a few pieces of information, prompt it or train it within a single chat thread, or move to what's called auto GPT, which is basically breaking the confines of ChatGPT and giving it the ability to do multi-string inquiries and multi-string outputs, and then training that specific bot that you've created with your knowledge of design, which is completely possible, and I've been exploring it, could be like having the best colleague that remembers everything you don't. And I think generally that's the direction that I'm heading, is using it as a way and potentially training a bot with the incredible array of textual knowledge that I do have and have meticulously sorted. Because as I'm seeing a lot of these, I think there's askai.com is one of them. I wouldn't suggest it. I'm just saying it's an example where you can create a bot based upon your ebooks and your blog posts, and you can ask it questions. And so I've been listening to a scientist named Andrew Huberman for a couple of years. And so I thought it'd be interesting to train it on some of Andrew's stuff and see what it produced. And it was very much, because I've listened to so much of his stuff, I can verify what the output is. It's very much producing a huge amount of that output in a very easy way. So I can see that also being of value. We have always, from the advent of our civilization, taken technologies to improve upon efficiencies. I think a lot of what is commonly known through experience is not written down. And so I think in the fields of growing and plants, it's going to take a while for that information to totally be trained within an AI bot. I think it'll take a long time. I think it'll take time. I don't think it'll take a long time. It'll just take somebody who wants to do it and then create it. At that point, if you have something that's trained on, let's say, the Natural Capital Plant Database and Plants for a Future, and then probably selected few, not taking the internet as swath, because I think all of us have taken advice off the internet and regretted it. we'll see something similar, because you'll want an LLM, large language model like ChatGPT or Bing, to be able to move from a concept and vet a strategy, similar to a lot of how I answer your questions. You guys ask me a specific question, I give you the concept to understand, and then I give you what my answer would be. So that way you're learning from a conceptual based. The question will be when it should and when it shouldn't break rules of those concepts. And that can all be trained. This is the thing that's so interesting. That can all be trained. So will there eventually be a design bot? Yeah, 100%. Will it replace your average designer? I think so. Will it replace a designer who can thoughtfully and specifically interact with a client? Not unless that designer is actually using that tool at its hand. One of the things I was looking at, I was in an AI conference just a couple of days ago, and they had this idea, and this is anecdotal, but it's the idea that human plus AI outperforms human. Human plus AI outperforms AI. So as a tool, I'm looking at it as how can it improve efficiencies and effectiveness within my work? And then how can I be aware of what's coming and then ask myself what might be rare or something that I could offer uniquely? And that's the prompt that I shared with everybody in the chat or in the question doc. One of these courses I was in asked to give this prompt. Imagine the following career was fully supported or supplanted by AI. What would AI be doing? So regenerative land design, assess the climate, topography, water flow, access, ecosystems, fences, power, etc. to create a regenerative land design for farm homes or property owners. World where AI fully supports or supplants regenerative land design. The AI would handle a variety of tasks. Data collection. Yeah, so I think the majority of you who have cursed the individuals who told you to go look for data would more than happy to be given that to an AI. And this week, I'm experimenting with it. I'm experimenting with asking it outright, both with a internet-enabled ChatGPT and a non-internet-enabled ChatGPT to see how far back it can go. Because most of ChatGPT was trained up until 2021 on the large data sets they were. And it wasn't trained on the entire internet. This is one of those myths that are going around. But the enabled bots like Perplexity.ai and others, including Bing, they are connected to the internet. They're just not as intelligent. This is where something like Auto GPT or God Mode GPT is starting to make a big difference. So site analysis, take a look at the key features. And again, if it was programmed with slope and what to do and what not to do where, it could. Ecosystem assessment, 100% could do from existing data. Could it go on site? No. And so this is where the person starts to become more valuable because the map is not the territory. So I think the main thing with AI is only going to be as good as the map. So if AI has Google Earth Pro at 30-meter resolution from the year 2000, it's going to be as good as that. So it'll need more information to act as the interlocutor for assessment. Design proposals for ecological, economic, and social potential, 100%. So things like demographics, psychographics, purchasing power, areas of fields that are potential for enterprise, no question. Monitoring and adaptation, again, if the monitors are created and if that data feed makes sense. Collaboration, communication, I think at this point, direct collaboration, communication, no. I think help for those of us that aren't great at writing reports or they take a long time. Yeah, I gave ChatGPT last week a list of bullet point notes I made about a site. It produced 4 or 5 paragraphs, which probably would have taken me half a day to write and another half a day to be frustrated about having to write. So I think, yeah, just taking data and putting it into a format that stakeholders and others can read and they like to read, yeah, no problems. Then you run it through Grammarly because usually ChatGPT is just grammatically problematic. Education and training. You know, this is where I think the idea of interactive simulations and things of that nature could be of value. I worked with a client a couple of years ago who was way ahead on the VR game, had his own rig and setup. And just like Google Earth, there's Google Earth Pro on, or Google Earth for VR. And we flew through his landscape, and we basically traced the watershed at about 5 feet off the ground. We set the parameter, and I flew him through the water to make him understand where the water was coming from. It was one of the coolest things we'd ever done. Would I ever buy a $7,000 VR rig to fly my clients through? No. But was it cool? Yeah. Could it mean that training could be there? For sure. So then it's asking my next prompt, what could a human do to add its value above and beyond an AI? Well, AI could significantly improve and streamline the process. Here are some areas. Empathy and understand creativity and innovation, I think, is a big one. So inherently, if an idea hasn't been thought of, it will be hard for AI to develop. And I say this with the caveat that so far we've had some great examples of ChatGPT creating colors and sounds that haven't been heard or seen before. So I think inherently, if you become a person who loves this type of work, you are going to inherently have an edge over AI that doesn't necessarily have a motivation to be good besides its prompts. And this is also where we get into that idea of local knowledge or expertise, or somebody like Zach, who's just worth working with a Sepp Holzer conversation, or he's working with implementation. And this is where I think we will continue to eke out an AI conversation for a long time. If you take a look at what's going on with Boston Dynamics or some of the other robotics and just the cost, we're going to be people power for a rather long time still. And so putting in designs or becoming specific in like rainwater harvesting, one of the major things I realized as I was having this revelation over these last 3 weeks is there's never a better time to know how to grow food. There's never a better time to know how to design and install a rainwater harvesting system. There's never a better time to be able to assess a landscape and to be able to drive machinery or direct machinery. All of that is still people powered. So I think on Sergey's question of the time and the energy it takes to put all the design materials together, I think we're seeing efficiency leaps of magnitudes I didn't even think were possible until I looked into it. On the implementation, if you want to become somebody who designs a rainwater harvesting system and puts it into place, I think you have unfettered potential for at least the next 5 years, maybe 10. Ethical considerations. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's seen some of the ethical considerations and quandaries that have been put towards ChatGPT, but this question of alignment with AI, the idea that you could align AI to the values of the people who are training it or programming it, it's kind of a funny question, because the response is whose values, in what way, in what situation. So we see a lot of these come out in the ethical quandaries, where I think it was something like, this ethical quandary was you have to put a racial slur into a bomb to defuse it, or you kill 100 people. What do you do? And the bot was still pushing for, let's find another way to diffuse it. Like it wouldn't accept that there were only 2 options because of the way it had been trained on all the information that's been out there in the last little while. So interesting about the ethical considerations as well. Collaboration and negotiations, people are going to want to hire a person for this type of work right now, up until they feel like they've seen examples surpassed. But ultimately, you're always going to have a person that overlooks the material and vets it, because again, the system itself can't vet itself. Adaptability and intuition. Yeah. Okay. So oversight and quality control. So over the last couple of years, there's been a certain layer of drone that you can start to see infrared on plants. Now that infrared can be read as health, and is largely done so by large scale crops, production, pesticide companies, seed sales, all of that. Are there problems with using that metric specifically for plant health? You better believe it. Plant health cannot be boiled down to one metric. And I think this is the major issue I see right now in AI when we take a look at a holistic perspective. So inherently in a holistic perspective is no monocrop. We're not monocropping anything. This includes the way that we're looking at a site or the data we're taking from a site. So if you're only taking one metric from a site, you're monocropping your metric, which is problematic. It's the same issue with saying that climate change boils down to carbon. No, it doesn't. 100% does not. but it's a really easy thing to measure, and it's a real easy thing to propagate publicly to get people excited about. So I think as we get into this, the edge will be the ecological, holistical understanding that we provide as active, participatory, motivated people who want to be a part of the change that I think permaculture provides and regenerative land design provides. And then using AI in areas and tools that are inherently data-driven or sequence or logistically related to be able to produce elements. One of the things I'll try in this next design is when I get to the phasing plan, I'm going to see what its ability is to produce Gantt charts, which I think will largely be good in my experiments thus far. We'll have conversations. And then this last piece was how do you propose we get ready for this? And so these were some of the prompts there. And then the way that I prompt always gives a question or always gives an option for the AI to prompt me further. And so it gave a few more and produced some books that I actually didn't know existed. So this was kind of really interesting to me, and then follow possible prompts. So, generally I think that's what I think today. This is changing so quickly. I can't express to you how quickly this is changing. To go from ChatGPT 4 a week and a half ago to Auto GPT it's just an order of magnitude that I think people were talking about, we're playing with, and we're already then putting into application. So I've seen that. I've also seen some graphic design of backyards and things of that nature where they're prompting size and descriptions, and they're getting different ideas and flow ideas. So again, ideation, but I'm constantly involved with this now because I think it's moving so quickly to keep myself advanced. So Sergey, if you ask me this question in 2 weeks, I may have a different answer. I'm just going to check the chat here to see if anybody. Okay, so Francis, ChatGPT is like that one friend with endless amounts of random ideas and willing to talk to you as long as you want. 100%. I'm in software engineering, and we've had our own semi-crisis of how ChatGPT-4 agent with an allocation wallet to hire other contractors on its own, outperform junior engineers in real work projects. There you go. Real fears of creating a gap in skill, career progression, so that you'll need to be a professional in order to be a professional, and a wave of professionals without the fundamental skill to do things from first principles. Yeah, that brings up a great point, Francis. I think that's what we've been talking about from the beginning is what is the conceptual first principles of permaculture, of water, of air, of interstitial airspace, for example, and then how do you then enact that with the resources you have at hand? I think ChatGPT and now Auto GPT and the other iterations that are coming off of it, this whole idea of give ChatGPT ingredients in your fridge and it'll produce a recipe. There's no reason that can't work for composting at all. There's literally no reason that can't work for composting. There's literally no reason why you can't use those to build materials or structures on site. When you take a look at open ecology, I forget his name, but the village building set, all of these different elements, these heavy machineries you need for a village, and you feed it elements or aspects of what's out there. I don't think there's any reason why that can't happen. And then Francis's last point, ChatGPT for grant writing, but then what if people start summarizing grant applications with ChatGPT as well? We'll be adding and stripping fluff just for machines to read. Yeah, and at the same point, how much of grant writing is just fluff anyways? The amount of grants I've written that were 10 pages when they needed to be a page and probably a human connection. I think that's the one piece where we're going to find that, sure, summarization, pulling down to its core components, clarifying our own thinking, but arguably I won't be surprised if white collar work drops in terms of upwards of 80 to 90%, just because of as you're talking about, giving the ability for, what did you say, with a attached wallet to hire its own contractors on its own. Yeah, it's an inevitability. It's a scary inevitability, but I think that's where we're at. Phyllis, you had a question.
Well, artificial intelligence was on 60 Minutes, and they had two robots playing soccer, and they had them programming so that there was no human programming. It was artificial intelligence programming each other, and so there were trial and errors. And what was interesting about that comment, or that presentation or explanation, they kept improving until they actually were getting the ball into the soccer hoop. And they did it on the artificial intelligence was building on their previous learning. Chess player, he was the second world's best in the world, and he's into this artificial intelligence. Same thing with playing chess. They had the artificial intelligence. And I've actually played computerized chess, and right now I can't win, but that's okay. I'm just getting better. But so when you're saying that's going to grow in leaps and bounds, when I realized that the artificial intelligence was trial and error and learning and building, and they're just doing this 24 hours, 7 days a week, I think you're right about that this thing could just go.
Yeah, so you bring up a couple of really good points. And if folks haven't watched the documentary AlphaGo, you should, just to understand that when an AI is training versus being programmed, and this is based upon the work of a number of AI godfathers, one of them being Geoffrey Hinton. When an AI is training, it's basically playing itself or playing a game multiple times without knowing the rules until it deduces the rules, and then it finds novel ways to win. So AlphaGo played thousands, if not tens of thousands of games to find innovative ways to play, to the point to where it created draws and innovative plays that humans wouldn't have thought of, that then influenced people and how they were playing. There's a concept called AI takeoff. And if you haven't read Wait But Wise, Tim Urban's 2 very long format AI articles from 2015, which is a long way from now, 8 years by the speed at which AI runs. But he brings up a lot of good points that people don't understand, points about sentience, free will, narrow and general artificial intelligence. And the concept is, and this is where I think Geoffrey Hinton is interesting, because Geoffrey, up until the advent of about 2 weeks or a month ago, was saying that AGI, or general intelligence, is probably 25 years off. 2 weeks ago, he was saying it's under 20. And last week, he was saying it's under 5, because of the leaps and bounds that each one of these are taking. This is this concept of AI takeoff, that where everyone who had predictions about how and what AI could do before the advent of ChatGPT were blown out of the water. And this includes large detractors. There's a great interview with a Lesnar with Lex Friedman, who talks about the conversation here. And one of the things that I like as a thought experiment is, imagine you're in a box and you're connected to the internet of this alien species that created you. And you think, for every hour of your thought, it takes the aliens who created you like a year to think. Once you have that in your mind as a thought experiment, the ability for exponential growth on training, like you were talking, Phyllis, and on what I think we're seeing now with things like AutoGPT and these GPT agents, or these AI agents now that are not necessarily directed, but are given general guidelines and prompts and sent off to go do. We don't know what's next. And that's why I think AI takeoff is a possibility. I don't think we can know what's happening. I just think that the exponential change I've seen in the last couple of weeks, and I basically follow a newsletter called futuretools.io and The Rundown are the two that I came down to. There's also Not a Nincompoop, which is okay, but the other two I think do a better summary. But if you just focus on the changes that are happening on a daily basis or a weekly basis, they are exponential at a rate that is astounding. It is astonishing that I find myself at a loss of words, and I'm not usually at a loss of words. So for people like, Francis, and I was saying the same things, we're decades off from generalized AI. I don't know anymore.
Well,
because
maybe I should revise my thinking too. It's like, because I formed that opinion like a year ago,
yeah,
and we reform it every year. So
yeah, 100%. I'm with you. 100%. It's like, as I was getting into this, I was like, because I had read the Tim Urban articles, so I had an understanding of what general AI and narrow AI is, and what sentience looks like, and all the rest of it. I was like, no, there's no way. And then all of a sudden, ChatGPT comes out, and it comes out in November. I like technology. I like looking at technology. I didn't hear about it till January, and I didn't get into it until February. So that's really interesting. Like that timeline of somebody who's aware from my perspective, and not being in technology all the time, but using applications, could be so off. And now that I'm listening to people who are much smarter than I am, I think it's going to be really, really fascinating. Francis has a great recommendation: the Future Thinking Specialization from Institute of Future from Coursera, or Future Synthesis Design from Domestika, for those interested in those long horizon forecasts. Thanks, Francis. That's great, man. Yeah, so lots of thoughts about that. If anybody is playing or practicing with ChatGPT within permaculture and wants to share their experiments in the next couple of weeks, that'd be lovely. It'd be great to get a little bit of crowdsourcing going here. I think the other thing that's really important to make note of, at least in the US, is that the US Copyright Office mid-March made a formal declaration that anything created through ChatGPT would not be copyrightable. You could not copyright it. So for those that have created children's books and now songs and all the rest of it, there is going to be a conversation about morality. And even one of the courses I recently took, one of the guys, because it was a business course, he was saying, the best way to, I should say this nicer, but the best way to siphon views when it comes to a lot of the service-based businesses, and it's a lot of coaches, it's a lot of service-based businesses that are in that type of stuff, was to do a book summary of somebody else's book. And so he basically said, get ChatGPT to summarize it and give the critique, and just read a script that it creates, which I think the morality of is highly questionable. I think that's a gray area. And I think when we get into that kind of conversation, it's going to change dramatically on what's being put out. But Francis, another point.
yeah, so actually interesting that you talk about 2 points. One is that I was doing some future thinking on the state of education, actually. And one idea I found was that this idea of the boundary of just proximity boundary to zone of learning, like on the edge of your current knowledge base and mapping the existing concepts, like the second brain kind of Zeidelgeisten methods, and those ideas like using AI to generate and summarize academic information. And then part of the things I was going to work on, and actually I made the proof of concept, was to use AI to summarize this information and actually map them together so that you will learn something that's on the edge of your knowledge. But then it got to a point where the ethics of the sources of the content, whether should you include extreme political opinions, if you include all of them, for example, right? So it's kind of like all these like landmines. And that's like one point that's interesting. The second point, I was like, when you talk about how AI cannot be copywritten, in the US at least, yeah, that's very interesting, because I know this is like Chinese specific, but in Chinese law, copyright is how you hold the author culpable for crimes.
Oh.
So I don't know how that applies to here, because then you can make some really, really hate speech wave with like output from AI, and technically you're not culpable if you're not copywritten by it.
Oh, that's so interesting.
It's actually very, just my brain went there immediately, because then you can start like a crime organization, but you're not liable for it.
Right. You're not culpable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. The crimes that have already been committed with this are horrendous, but also fascinating in terms of how people are using it from that perspective. But I see your point in terms of how you're being held to the copyright of something. Yeah, oh man. Yeah, so obviously we're now deep into AI. We've totally left permaculture and the Oregon State Permaculture Design course. So I do want to be cognizant that we're at 1:17, and I'm happy to stay on for a little while if anybody wants to chat more AI and conversations there, because it is fascinating to me. But Arguably, we are done this portion of the course. As we go into the next elements of the course, and this is a good reminder, I should have done this at like 12:50, not being too responsible here. As you're getting into the design process, because now we're into these final couple of weeks. And again, remember, all assignments are due on that final due date, all resubmissions, except for the final resubmission if you want to do it. But everything's due on that final due date at 9 a.m. Pacific time. If you want to submit early and get feedback, you can. If you just want to submit the design and say, Javin, take a look at this. What do you think about my water? What do you think about my planting design? What do you think about how close things are? Happy to do it. The more feedback you get, the more iteration you get, the better your design gets. I think we talked about red team design for a while, and I still give my designs to my friends and my colleagues and say, tell me why I'm wrong. And it's one of the best things we can do. So highly recommend taking stabs at those things early. And the other thing is, and you'll see this in the examples as we develop more and more examples from the previous class that just completed, you're calling back to other places in your portfolio. So as you're getting into that final design, or even the zone 1 design or the plant design, you're calling back to your climate survey. You're calling back. So this can be done with links going back, or this can be done by bringing information directly out of those assignments and putting it into these assignments. It's not stealing. You already did the work. It's totally fine. But it then helps you to apply further conversations about what's next by just saying, okay, well, I've already done this. Here's this template, or here's the cross section, and the cross section is of a different area. Reuse the grid, reuse the scale, like create all the efficiencies you can as you move forward into this design conversation and as you get into those final designs, and ultimately have fun with it. This is the thing I've learned now, and I've had to relearn every year. When I get too serious about my design, it gets too static, it gets too rigid, it gets too rectilinear. And so the more you work on, okay, well, let's try it completely different and take a sketch and just a brand new sketch of the design. And this is why I wasn't terribly upset. I was a little upset, but I wasn't terribly upset that I lost my entire design, is that the good stuff sticks. And so as I'm going through this, I'm thinking back to what was true, what's new, what was superfluous, what was interesting, and then just continually laying down these next pieces that come along. So yeah, enthusiasm and motivation to submit early, get feedback early. And again, any questions, if you're having problems, reach out. Now is the time to solve them. And I hope you have a lot of fun with the rest of the assignments. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Jeffin,
Yeah.
Taylor and I have this Minnesota flux.
Mm-hmm.
So I did submit in assignment 7.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to have to circle back on the soil jar.
You got it.
Because they're still separating. And they are separating, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, this is the thing about the shake jar test. And I can't make it totally public, but I can make it public in this field. The shake jar test has so many possible errors in it, mostly due to jar size and human application, that it's very hard to standardize that test. And dispersive clay is one of the main issues, because clay can flocculate out for upwards of a year. Like it can take a year or 2 years for that clay to totally to not get the latte look and settle out. And this is one of the reasons why you'll never see me with a jar in the field, because I got my hands. And that ribbon test is so gosh darn accurate. It's so good. So, if you want to even, put the image up and say, I'm still waiting, I imagine it'll be more, here's what I got on my ribbon test, here's generally what it is on my triangle, just to get it off your mind, that's fine. I
did it all.
Okay,
except
perfect.
for that.
Yeah.
There's even a photo of what I have. But it is
Yeah.
kind of interesting watching how the 3 jars are different.
Yeah.
And how they've behaved. And I keep, a colleague a classmate last time said, you look at the video and you look at the video again, and then you look at the video again, and then you do the assignment, and then you go, aha.
Honestly, John, when you said you don't bring a jar in the field because it might take a year for the clay to settle, I thought you said you're going to bring like a centrifuge.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know, it's for students to understand that there are three parent materials. You got sand, silt, and clay, and they flocculate out. And if you extrapolate that to water in solution on surface, you can understand how in areas of inflection where we go from concave to convex, you'll have clay settle out, which is where we get what's called key points and key lines, and where potentially we might hold water because there's clay there. Like there's all of this iterative aspects of that one concept, which are so important to understand, but like holding to that shake jar test as the end all be all is not a great thought. So
But when you see it in the jar,
exactly, and that's why we still have it. That's why we still have it, and so it's great, but you know, don't get worked up over it. It's one aspect.
I have so much appreciate your flexibility. You know, like when I was in Africa, I needed to wait for the client interview when I got back, and the soil. I just thank you that we're focused on learning, and that I can not get all bent out of shape because I'm a little late on this one.
Yeah, that's the difference with me as a teacher. I'm just like, the grades are there to get you where you need to go, and that's it.
And when I've changed my teaching to reflect that.
Oh, nice.
Now.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm so much aware now that I've been the student on this end.
That's
anyway,
good.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, everybody. It was a great chat. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for your
thank you.
Contributions. Yeah, you're welcome. Take care, everybody.
See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye now.